Right. Well, and that is exactly why I argue we must recognize Linkin Park's One More Light not merely as a commercial pivot, but really as a masterpiece of structural vulnerability and a courageous paradigm shift.
A courageous paradigm shift. I hear the passion in your defense, and I certainly respect the desire to evolve after decades in the industry. But I have to push back strongly on that framing.
You don't hear the vulnerability?
Calling it structural vulnerability feels like applying a very generous academic gloss to what is, mechanically speaking, a highly optimized corporate commodity.
A commodity? Really?
Yes. When I analyze the production of this record, I don't hear raw human vulnerability. I hear a product that has had almost every ounce of human friction meticulously and mathematically processed out of it by some of the most efficient pop mixing engineers in the world.
Well, look, I can understand why the glossy surface of the record might lead you to view it as industrialized. It is undeniably a polished pop album, but I think you're missing the reality of the underlying methodology that got them to that sound.
Which is what exactly?
You have to look at the ontological shift in how these 6 musicians actually worked together. For their entire career, their architecture was track first. They built heavy instrumentals, crafted melodies over them, and shoehorned the lyrics in last. But here, acting on advice from Rick Rubin, they adopted a strictly lyrics-first methodology.
Right, the famous PR narrative.
It's not just a narrative. They literally left their instruments outside the room. 6 men sat in a circle and just discussed the human condition, their hidden frustrations, their deepest traumas, their aging. Chester Bennington himself used a brilliant metaphor for this.
The jungle metaphor, yeah.
Exactly. He described his old creative process as swinging a machete aggressively in a jungle just to get through it. But with this album, he chose to drop the machete and survey the area.
Okay, but
Let me finish. When you deliberately strip away the heavy, distorted guitars on a track like Heavy, which, yes, was co-written with pop savants Julia Michaels and Justin Tranter, you aren't processing out humanity, you are intentionally creating a spatial void that allows the raw confessional weight of Bennington's trauma to finally breathe without competing against a wall of noise. I see it as a triumph of conceptual art over bass instrumentation.
that is a beautifully articulated defense, but I see it completely differently. Using confessional trauma as a shield to deflect from musical critique is a really dangerous game.
It's not a shield, it's the core of the art.
Let us dissect Heavy not as a conceptual art piece, but by looking at the technical reality of the track itself. Your defense of the lyrics-first approach provides a very convenient excuse for what is essentially the total abandonment of the craft of rock instrumentation.
Oh, come on.
No, look at the data. Heavy is mathematically predictable to a fault. It is locked at exactly 75 beats per minute. Now, for our listeners, why does 75 beats per minute matter? Because that is the literal resting heart rate of an average adult.
Which serves the contemplative mood of the piece.
It is mathematically calculated to be inoffensive, to provoke zero adrenaline. It's written in F-sharp minor, which is essentially the default key for melancholic radio pop. Furthermore, the instrumental isn't a band playing together. It is built entirely on Ableton Live loops.
But the loops are just the modern canvas. The collaboration with Julia Michaels and Justin Tranter brought a structural discipline to their songwriting that they've never had before.
I would argue it wasn't an artistic collaboration so much as it was hiring factory floor supervisors to assemble a standard focus-grouped pop hit.
That's incredibly cynical.
Tranter and Michaels are brilliant, but they are hit makers by trade. They build reliable commodities, and let's talk about that spatial void you admire so much. If the goal was raw intimacy, why did they ship the entire project off to Mixstar Studios to be mixed by Serban Ghenea?
Because he's a master at clarity.
He is arguably the premier pop mixing engineer on the planet. His entire job is to apply surgical compression and equalization. For anyone unfamiliar with compression, it's a tool that puts a ceiling and a floor on the audio. It turns up the quietest whispers and pushes down the loudest moments so every single element hits the ear at the exact same radio-friendly volume.
It makes it accessible.
Ghenea's interventions removed any remaining dynamic range and erased any microscopic human error in the performances. The final product isn't a breathing spatial void. It's an impeccably polished, lifeless husk that conforms to every rule of the 2017 pop factory floor.
I think characterizing it as a lifeless husk completely ignores the dialectical tension the band was trying to achieve. You are looking at the glossy pop production as a flaw when the album explicitly tells us it is a deliberate choice.
A deliberate choice to sound generic?
Let me give you an original analogy. Think of a person walking into a crowded party who is completely broken inside, suffering from severe clinical depression. But they are wearing a meticulously tailored suit and a bright, frozen smile so that nobody asks them how they are. The pop production on One More Light is that tailored suit.
Okay, so the synths are the suit.
Yes. Look at track 8, Halfway Right, co-written with Ross Golan and produced with Michael Keenan and Alexander Spitz. Sonically, the production is arguably the brightest on the album. It sounds like upbeat, Disney-like electropop. But look at the lyrics. It details Bennington's horrifyingly dark experiences with drug addiction.
The blackout incident.
Right, specifically an incident where he blacked out behind the wheel and woke up on a dirt road. The central hook, "If I'm wrong, then I'm halfway right," perfectly encapsulates the cognitive dissonance of an addict. It represents disease thinking, the lies we tell ourselves to justify self-destruction.
I hear the lyrical depth, sure.
The upbeat electropop sound intentionally masks that darkness, perfectly mimicking how severely depressed individuals fake functionality for society. It's a brilliant aesthetic embodiment of a psychological defense mechanism.
I appreciate the tailored suit metaphor, but I have to challenge the fundamental premise of that interpretation. If they genuinely wanted to explore the cognitive dissonance of severe addiction, they didn't need to wrap it in a saccharine synth canbo.
It creates artistic tension.
What you call a psychological defense mechanism, I see as a risk-averse commercial compromise. To use your analogy, it's less like a depressed person at a party and more like a pharmaceutical commercial.
A commercial.
Yes. You have a voiceover describing terrible, harrowing side effects, while the visuals show people running happily through a sunny field. The dissonance isn't there to create profound artistic tension. It is there to ensure the consumer isn't alienated and the song still gets placed on daytime radio playlists.
Well, I disagree that it's just about playlist placement. But since you brought up the radio, let's look at their engagement with contemporary sounds. Because this is where the album asserts its cultural relevance.
Here we go.
They didn't just passively mimic modern radio. They actively manipulated the modern sonic palette. Take the opening track, Nobody Can Save Me, produced with John Green and Andrew Belucchi. Mike Shinoda utilized Wave's linear phase EQ and pitch shifters on his scratch vocals to construct this incredibly specific glitch aesthetic.
A glitch aesthetic, really?
Yes, for the listeners, a linear phase EQ is a digital tool that lets you surgically alter the frequencies of a sound without messing up the timing or phasing of the audio. Shinoda chopped up these rough vocal takes and shifted the pitch up and down to create an unnatural, stuttering melody. In the context of a song about hitting rock bottom, that digital stutter represents a rebirth, a fractured state of mind, slowly finding digital clarity.
I'm sorry, I have to step in here because we are getting into the most performative section of the entire record. Let's look honestly at who they are trying to sell this to. We are talking about a generational critique here.
They are expressing themselves to a new audience.
Those pitch-shifted vocal chops in Nobody Can Save Me and later in Sorry for Now aren't some profound representation of a glitch rebirth. They are textbook, short-form viral hooks. They are engineered specifically to trigger engagement metrics for a younger, streaming native audience.
They are exploring future bass.
They clearly heard the rise of future bass, that EDM subgenre defined by swelling synthetic drops and high-pitched chipmunk vocal chops that dominated 2017, and awkwardly stapled it to their brand.
Awkwardly stapled. What about track 2, Good Goodbye, co-written with Jesse Shotkin? They brought in Stormzy to represent London grime and Pusha T for street rap, all wrapped up in this massive basketball arena energy. That isn't awkward. It's a bold synthesis of subcultures. They are building a cultural bridge.
They didn't build a cultural bridge, they executed a corporate acquisition.
Oh, that's absurd.
Structurally, Good Goodbye operates exactly like a legacy tech company acquiring a hip new startup entirely to gain access to its younger user base. Bringing in Stormzy to rap about Linkingtons and parks next to Mike Shinoda bragging about being in the industry longer than his critics have been alive, it feels incredibly inorganic.
It's an authentic collaboration.
It sounds exactly like content written by a panicked corporate social media manager desperately trying to speak Gen Z by renting credible names. The result is a focus grouped commodity completely devoid of the actual subcultural roots that make grime or street rap compelling. It fundamentally undermines the authenticity it's trying to project.
You are focusing exclusively on the upbeat, pop-centric tracks to serve this narrative of commercial cynicism. But to do so, you have to deliberately ignore the emotional, acoustic anchors that ground the entire back half of the record. This is where the illusion of corporate manufacturing completely falls apart.
Ah yes, the acoustic anchors.
Let's look at track 9, the title track One More Light, co-written with Ig White, and the closer Sharp Edges, co-written with Ilzy Juber. Brad Delson's acoustic fingerpicking on Sharp Edges is raw, unpretentious, and stripped of all the studio trickery we've been debating.
Raw and unpretentious? Are we listening to the same song?
Yes, absolutely. And look at the vocal performance in One More Light. Chester Bennington was a vocalist renowned for a massive soaring tenor that could effortlessly flip into devastating multi-octave screams. But here, they made the deliberate decision to restrict his vocal melody to an incredibly narrow range.
Right.
Just an E-flat 4 to an E-flat 5. For the listeners, that means he is staying entirely in the exact middle of his voice. He never pushes, he never strains. That limitation forces the delivery into a state of hushed, exhausted intimacy.
Intimacy.
When he sings about a chair being empty in a room, the restraint in his voice carries the weight of true, lived tragedy. It strips away the bombastic posturing of their youth to convey a deep, quiet grief. It is a masterclass in learning through pain, proving that genuine musical catharsis doesn't require volume.
Look, I completely understand why that restraint feels intimate to you, and I don't doubt the real grief behind the lyrics. But as a music critic, I have to evaluate how that intimacy is mechanically achieved. If the front half of the album is pandering to the youth, Sharp Edges and One More Light are designed specifically to pander to their older audience.
Pandering?
For a vocalist with Bennington's explosive capabilities, restricting a vocal range to a single octave doesn't read as intentional vulnerability to me. It reads as a complete lack of creative risk. This brings us to a different kind of generational critique. This isn't raw authenticity. It is manufactured inclusivity and safety.
Safety? Singing about the fragility of life, the inevitability of death, and the suicide of a friend is safe?
The lyrical subject matter is heavy, yes, but the sound is entirely safe. It is a sanitized, focus-grouped nostalgia sold to aging millennials who want the comfort of acoustic guitars without any sonic challenge.
That is incredibly dismissive.
Let's use technical data to dissect this so-called raw acoustic authenticity. Sharp Edges is built on a mathematically sterile 1-6-4-5 diatonic progression. For our listeners, that is the most common, exhausted chord progression in the history of Western popular music.
It's a folk tradition.
It's the 4 chords you hear in almost every generic pop hit since the 1950s. It is musically designed to be perfectly resolved, offering zero harmonic tension. Furthermore, if this was truly a raw acoustic performance, why did they artificially widen the high-frequency spatial depth?
To support the melody.
They didn't rely on the room acoustics of a guy playing a guitar. They layered incredibly expensive surgical pitch correction software over the lead vocals and then stacked perfectly tuned female background vocals provided by Ilzy Juber to widen the mix. It is an attempt to recreate an organic acoustic spark, but doing so by replacing genuine, flawed musical catharsis with focus group campfire aesthetics engineered in a multi-million-dollar facility.
That is a remarkably bleak and cynical way to interpret an album fundamentally concerned with human survival and mental health. You are entirely missing the overarching narrative of resilience that ties all these sonic experiments together.
I'm not missing anything.
If you look at a track like Battle Symphony, written at a driving 149 beats per minute, or Talking to Myself, Co-produced with J.R. Rotham and Andrew Jackson, you see the band pulling these fractured digital and acoustic pieces together. The entire album functions exactly as that title suggests. It is a brave, misunderstood symphony.
A brave symphony.
By blending the refined London pop sensibilities of a producer like Justin Parker on a track like Invisible with the raw, bleeding trauma of the band's reality, they created a timeless document. It transcends genre entirely. It isn't just rock and it isn't just pop. It is a meticulously crafted monument to human resilience that will outlast the cynical gatekeeping of critics who demand they remain frozen in the angst of 2003.
It isn't a monument to anything except the sheer efficiency of the industrialized music machine. Your brave symphony is, at its core, nothing more than a heavily processed, zero dynamic range commodity where even the artist's deepest, most visceral trauma was auto-tuned, quantized to a mathematically perfect grid and packaged into a neat, predictable viral loop for mass consumption.